All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about guns, mental health, potential restrictions, regulations, licensing requirements that might help with the gun violence problem. If you see us as having a gun violence problem, I would probably argue that we have one. So, what I want to do is one at a time examine the sorts of proposals that people will offer, and I'm only going to focus on the ones that I think are pretty good, and then consider the arguments against them and for them and see which one wins. We're going to use, again, the criteria we always use. What I want is irrelevant. What you want is irrelevant for the most part. We're going to use evidence, logic, reasoning. That's it. Those are our criteria. It has nothing to do with my beliefs, desires, or whether or not I own 37 weapons or if I own none. Totally irrelevant. Whether you want guns and like them, totally irrelevant. What's relevant is the particular arguments and the responses to those arguments. So the first one I want to talk about that I would insert 43 memes, but it takes me too long to do because I'm crappy at editing and I don't think it'll be worth it because I am sure that you've seen or heard them, where people are posting all sorts of claims like, none of these laws would have stopped the Boulder shooting, or people at Boulder had all these laws and it still didn't prevent the shooting, or Atlanta could have had these laws but they didn't and didn't stop the shooting. The argument that laws wouldn't stop shooters depends on the law or regulation we're talking about. But there's one thing I want to address first before we get into that, and the law that I want to talk about, or regulation I want to talk about first, because I think it would be one that has promised to be effective, would be waiting periods. But the first thing that people have to recognize that's happening with all these arguments that is absolutely objectively invalid is that people act as if when they're making these arguments that in order for a regulation or a law to be justified, then it would have to stop 100% of the things it's trying to regulate. So people will say like, well, waiting periods might not have stopped that crime, or gun laws might not have stopped that crime. They wouldn't have stopped that one because maybe someone would have still gotten it. Or look at these crimes that were done with illegal guns that you would have never stopped anyways. Or the only people who are going to be punished by gun restrictions are those who want to legally buy guns. Criminals are going to get them anyways. If someone's willing to murder someone, they're willing to buy a gun illegally. All of those arguments get to go out the window because laws, legislation, licensure, regulation, none of those are designed in such a way that they can prevent all wrongdoing. That's not the way the world works. So if that's what you're arguing, if you're like, well, this couldn't stop them, you get to just say, okay, wow, I used that argument for a while. It made sense, but I'm about to see how and why that argument has to go. Reason number one, I'll just use a headline that popped out at me the other day. It was like a Yahoo News headline about some OR surgeon who was like a fraud. He'd forged his own credentials and was like, apparently or something, because it was just a headline like, nurse says OR doctor didn't know what they were doing. And person killed people by doing surgery. That doesn't mean that having requirements and credentialing requirements and licensure requirements for being a surgeon is a bad idea. It just shows that someone somewhere is going to be an asshole and get around them. Right? If you say, well, driver's license requirements can't keep every driver safe. Well, yeah, I know. There are licensed drivers that are bad. But that doesn't mean we throw out the whole licensure deal. Speed limits can't keep everybody from speeding. Well, exactly. I know they can't, but they keep most of us from doing it. And overall, knowing that those restrictions and regulations can't be perfect, we accept them because overall it diminishes the number of people wrongly killed in surgery by incompetent people who don't know what the hell they're doing. It lowers the number of deaths on the highway by having people at least have a little bit of experience driving and pass a test before they get their license. Having the speed limit keeps everybody, especially those people who aren't very good at it, from going 150 miles an hour. So we know that none of those laws or regulations, no law, no regulations, no licensing requirement that you could have for anything is going to be able to be perfectly applied. Now, before I get into the waiting period specifically, one other thing that people talk about is, well, we need to just enforce the laws we have. That's a great start. The only problem is that they're so different state to state, it's almost impossible to do. Because if the difference between being legal and illegal in one state is whether or not my gun's on my dashboard, under my front seat, or mounted on my gun rack, and in some states, I can't do any of those three things without a license, but then one state over, like being as close as I am to a border, I'm a 15-minute drive away from totally different gun laws. That makes it impossible, really impossible, to police these things. So people wanting to have some sort of understanding or have either states collectively come together and say, hey, we've got to have some overlap and we have to be willing to enforce one another's laws, or federally mandated sorts of guidelines or restrictions or regulations. That's why people want those. It's impossible. It would be impossible for California and Nevada to be able to consistently apply their gun laws because they're so radically different. So those are two things I wanted to get out of the way. And now we're going to keep this to 10 minutes or less. And I'm going to prove to you something very interesting. The argument that waiting periods would not have stopped the shootings in Atlanta and Boulder is 100% demonstrably false. It doesn't work. That claim is false. It's invalid. The inferences are bad, because I can guarantee you that those specific shootings would not have happened if Georgia and Colorado had 10-day waiting periods. Why? Because for it to be those specific instances, they would have to be those people with those weapons and those victims on that day. And that wouldn't have happened because both of the weapons used were purchased same day and 6 days prior. So those gunmen could not have had the weapons they had and shot the people they did. Now, here's the thing. I'm not arguing that I can guarantee they wouldn't have come back later and shot other people or more people or anything else. But I'm saying those instances would definitely not have happened. Now, why is that important? Because a significant percentage of acts of gun violence are impulsive, right? They're impulsive in the same way people get pissed off and angry, and they might be angry and they might be depressed or they might be frustrated, but it's the same way with suicides. Suicide's even higher if we have guns around, the number of impulsive suicides. The best research we've got says that depending whether we're talking about suicides or homicides, that we would be able to stop anywhere from 10 to 20%. And I'll include a link, a summary of the research I think is really great, and it's done by the RAND Corporation, which is just it looks like a consulting company that does research. And so you can pick apart the research because they kind of do a little meta-analysis of a bunch of different studies. Pick it apart. But there's good evidence, and it looks pretty good to me, especially since there's a way to extrapolate these things, because for so long, due to the Brady Bill, there were 5-day waiting periods for some places. At least 3 days until we had this instant background check stuff. So there is all of the evidence that anybody has looked at demonstrates that we would be stopping some gun violence if we had waiting periods. Now, we absolutely wouldn't be stopping them all. But 10 to 20% adds up. It could be 5 to 10,000 gun deaths a year prevented just because people changed their minds. Now, you might not believe these people would change their mind if they were crazy enough and struggling enough and going through enough of a tough time to be willing to go out, buy a gun, and go shoot some people. You might want to think, well, at the end of that 10 days, they'd still be motivated. And maybe some of them would. But also I know that I've been 3 feet from the remote on the couch and watched a Geico commercial that I hate just because I wasn't willing to get up and get it. There's also a second reason, though, why waiting periods help. Even if the person doesn't change their mind, it gives other people an opportunity to intervene. Maybe someone notices their behavior. Maybe in that 10 days, someone says, hey, what's up? Maybe someone gets them help. Maybe someone stops them physically. Maybe someone calls the police. Maybe someone utilizes their state, if their state has one, red flag laws, which don't worry, I'll talk about them too at some point. Right? Maybe someone notices. It gives people a shot. And those shots could add up to 10, 15, 20% of these crimes being stopped. And that is enough. Because I guarantee you I can find you 5,000 to 10,000 of the people who died from gun violence last year who would say, hell yeah. I wish it wouldn't have happened to me. I wish it wouldn't have happened to my family. So if it's going to save a few, it seems worth it. So to review, one, the idea that the criticism that restrictions or laws won't stop all gun violence isn't legitimate, because licenses and regulations don't have to stop everything, right? If they even stop a little bit in this case, it'll be progress. Two, the idea that we just can solely focus on enforcing the laws we have, when they're so disparate from state to state, that's an impossibility. Now, when we specifically look at waiting periods, it seems like they could be really, really effective for two reasons. One, people change their minds. People calm the fuck down. People relax, chill out, meet someone new, find a reason to be happy, encounter a cat or a dog, whichever they like. There's a million things that can happen that could make someone change their mind. And two, maybe someone else would notice and intervene and help them change their mind for them or prevent them from doing it. All of which starts to add up. And I will remind you that if you're saying a law has to be 100% effective, 100% enforceable, and stop 100% of the crimes it's designed to prevent, then you absolutely positively don't want a border wall. Because no one ever has or ever will argue that it's going to stop 100% of illegal immigrants. You sure as hell wouldn't want licensing requirements for surgeons, because clearly some people are going to fake it. It's not going to stop all fraudulent, unqualified surgeons. So think about what your reasons are, and let's figure out some good ones, because I cannot see a sane, rational objection to waiting periods on the grounds that I considered today. Now, someone might want to argue, but it's going to prevent me if I really need a gun today because the people who are coming after me and I need to protect myself. Well, you probably have bigger problems at that point. So, thanks for the time. We'll talk more soon. Have a great day.